Greetings, everyone. Hello, and welcome back to Alnadi. I'm very happy to have a new episode with an exciting discussion here. Very happy to have with me Dr. Nagar. Hi, Dr. Nagar.
Hi, and hi to the listeners. I'm glad to be back, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much for accepting my invite.
Oh, wait.
So, really, from my experience, Dr. Nagar, comparing the different types of modern musics, I have seen that the Persian music has a special case of the concept of composition and the concept of improvisation. I'd like to see what does it mean to compose in Persian music? What does it mean to improvise?
Well, it's quite a big question,
Mhm.
but I would like to address the question with a little bit of information for those of our listeners who might not be that familiar with the Dastgah music in general.
Mhm.
Uh, this is a music culture we have come to know for about 200 years now. I mean, the roots are obviously older, but the way it is being treated now that we name on that Persian Dastgah music, or some people call it Persian traditional music and so on.
Mhm.
Some people call it Persian classical music. Whatever they call it, this form or this way of treating the music is only about 200 years old. We know it from Qajar era onwards.
Mhm.
And this is being performed um, more or less with I mean, when you have a whole program being performed, you have more or less most of the content in non-metric parts,
Mhm.
most of it without even a pulsation.
Mhm.
It's very free rhythm. I'm using the word free rhythm intentionally here because I don't want to refer to the words like taqasim or in Farsi we say avazi, something which is not with pulsation, let alone with beats or meter. That is very much dependent, or not dependent, but somehow goes together with singing and poetry. And when you look at the whole program, most of the albums in the more traditional sense, if it's, let's say, 1 hour of a program, more than half of it is for sure this free rhythm thing, which is, again, traditionally done by the singer as the leader. And then there is usually one or two instrumentalists following, which they call jawab avaz. Avaz is what the singer is doing, and jawab, as you know, of course,
Mhm.
is a response to that.
Mhm.
And then, in order to kind of decorate it or prepare for it or conclude it, there come pieces which are in metric forms.
Mhm.
The one that they put in sometimes they translate it to interlude, like they start with, sometimes they say introduction, but the original name is Pish Daramad
Mhm.
because it comes, Pish in Farsi means before,
Mhm.
and Daramad is always the opening of a whole journey of Dastgah. When we perform a Dastgah, there is a cycle which works like a journey. We travel in some different maqams,
Mhm.
and then we go back home. And the starting point is always called a Daramad. So the one that comes before the Daramad is a Pish Daramad. That's a metric piece. If there's an ensemble performing, they perform it together. It comes in unison. And then there comes usually an avazi, a free rhythm part by an instrument, usually the lead.
Mhm.
And then the singer starts singing.
Mhm.
Sometimes in between these two, between the free rhythm by the instrument and the beginning of the singer singing, there can come another metric piece, which we call chahar mezra, which is a populated picking style. And it's known for its virtuosity. I mean, it is supposed to show how good or how skillful the player is.
Mhm.
Originally, it was only for a solo instrumentalist, but then later on, there came ensemble versions and performances as a group into this too. But originally, it was only for one instrumentalist.
Mhm.
And then there goes avaz and jawab avaz, and on and on. And in between, at any part of this cycle in the Dastgah, at any part of the journey, there can come another char mizrab or anything that is metric,
Mhm.
especially when they switch from one maqam to another in the journey, there might come some piece which is in that maqam. And sometimes though, there also is a tasnif involved. Tasnif in this kind of music is a vocal metric piece. And then it goes on till the journey is over. And at the end, there is either a tasnif or just a reng. Reng is a so-called dancing piece. They call it suitable for dancing, but of course, that's also a special kind of music. So the parts which are metric are more, no, not fully, but more subject to composition. But they have also, there are many albums which have the introduction, the Pish Dar Amad, the Char Mezrab even, as improvised pieces, especially when it's only solo. I mean, if you listen to programs that Mohammad Reza Lutfi and Mohammad Reza Shajarian performed, one tar and one singer, usually with a tombak, and the tombak player is always following. He is or she is supposed to grasp what the meter is and just perform that and follow the melodies. There you can hear, obviously, that Lutfi on the tar is half improvising, at least. Even the metric pieces, even the introduction, Pish Dar Amad piece, is not fully composed. But in ensemble performances, because it's a group and they are supposed to perform something that they know, of course, there comes the necessity of pre-decided melodies. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about composition in Dastgah music. And the history of this, as if we go back, the oldest ones we know with the names of the composers are around that 180 years or so. It's quite close to the original time we know Dastgah music. And the most important from these old ones are Darwish Khan, a tar player, or a bit later Mortezane Dawood, again a tar player, and then it goes a bit later and we have Ali Naghi Waziri, we have Abul Hassan Sabah and those. Of course, they also composed some other pieces from time to time, like Ali Naghi Waziri has a very, I think at least 3 very famous pieces with titles, with names. I mean, they are not in any of these Reng or Char Mezrab or Pish Dar Amad formats. I'm not using the word form because we are not talking about the internal structure, but it's about where they come in the whole program.
Yeah.
And from Waziri, for example, we have a very famous one, Dokhtarak Joulide, they call it. It's a very difficult piece. He originally composed it and performed it on tar, but later people performed it as ensembles too. And it brought in another, I mean, in the whole program, when you listen to them, they are also making spaces in between the whole course of the main content, because it is considered to be quite heavy if you just sit and with full concentration listen to all these free rhythm parts. So a Char Mezrab or a piece like this is also keeping the connection while is giving you a break, so that you more easily follow them. And then in the end, the Reng, which is usually the shortest and kind of a bit lighter, is supposed to connect you with the outside world. Right? I mean, they say that this type of music is more and more introvert. It is supposed to take you to a journey inside. So in the end, they can't just leave you in the air, traditionally again. Otherwise, nobody will manage to bring you back to the earth. So they are supposed to they are supposed to make a connection, and they are usually saying that Reng is doing that function. Apart from these, I mean, these roles, let's say, that these parts are playing, what is reflected in these pieces, a Pish Dar Amad, a Char Mezrab, a Reng, a Tasnif, is usually the same maqam content of the Dastgah journey. So what you usually hear from many Persian musicians when they want to analyze a Pish Daromad by Darvish Khan, what they do is that they put the Pish Daromad there and they tell you that this part is in Daromad, this part is in the next maqam, which is Dad, this is blah, 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 whatever the Dastgah is. And these parts are the Furud parts. Furud is when you go back home. And they are basically following the footsteps of the maqam content of the journey of that Dastgah appearing again in that piece. They might also say that this whole tasnif is, let's say, in Rock. For example, we have Pish Daromad in Rock, which is one maqam in the cycle of Mahur, for example. And they very rarely talk about form in the sense that one would expect, like structure of how things happen in that one piece. Like if you compare it with the Western mindset, that something is opening and then it goes to the next theme, and then we have a variation of the first theme, and so on and so forth. Or if you want to separate it into, let's call them paragraphs or chapters, they don't follow a certain number of rhythmic cycles, for example, if you want to compare with, as much as I know, with the Ottoman version, that you have a certain how to say framework for that. In what usul, in what rhythmic cycle you are composing, then how many of those will be involved in the first khana, for example, and the rest. Or if you have a miyan khana, it is supposed to be the highest part of the journey. Such things you don't see it in this sense in composing a Pish Daromad or even a ring. You usually have a series of supposedly nice and meaningful melodies that are somehow reflecting parts of that Dastgah journey. But in Chahar Mezrab, we have, I mean, it has developed during the decades of these 200 years as well, but we have a pattern of picking, which we call paye. And that is kind of like consistent. Like you have a paye and there comes the first melody, then you go back to either that paye or the same pattern in another maqam of your journey, and then it goes on and goes on. So there it's a little bit more clear where the lines are drawn. And this is all kind of following the content of Dastgah. So a lot of musicologists, when they talk about form in Persian music, they say we have these pieces as the form, as the whole program, and then inside them we have the form of a Dastgah, which is a more or less preset of what maqams will follow one another, and then you go back to the home that you started from. And this is as far as you can generalize. Under these names, you can find a lot of material. For example, Faramarz Paiva, which is among the, in addition to being a master in santur playing, he's also among the highest published musicians, because he was very serious about writing his own music and correcting all the details and then having them published. There were other musicians transposing the santur stuff for tar and kamanche. So we have a lot of his material available. He also performed them in programs. And there you have some stuff to compare, if you want. And if you do that, then you will see that, for example, in Reng, there are some underlying similarities. At least we can put them in two groups. That any Reng falls either into this kind of dealing with rhythm or the other one. And there are many recurrent motifs, at least in timing patterns. So I can say that it is possible to find more detailed stuff which is at use for Rengs, separately from Chahar Mezrabs. For Pish Daromads, less than that. For Tasnifs, in between, I would say. But it's not a matter of form in the sense of either the Ottoman one that I mentioned or the Western classical one as the presenting a theme and then going to another theme or a variation and then coming back to the theme, like ABA, blah blah. That sort of thing doesn't exist in improvisation. I don't know how much I managed to
No,
clarify.
you covered it very well, Dr. Nagar. Now, if that is the kind of traditional types or of pieces that come into the program, what else is being composed? You just mentioned Ali Naqi Waziri and maybe Abul Hassan and others, that they have pieces that are maybe not familiar with the program structure, right? Can you shed some light on this, and then we take it from there?
We shouldn't forget, I have to emphasize on this, we shouldn't forget that we can't really generalize that this was the longer tradition and then the exceptions came like Waziri and Sabah, because what we know about what was happening before that is a bit in the dark. I mean, for about 300 years or so, in between Safavid era and then Qajar times, we know nothing about what was happening. We know what was happening from before Safavid times and a bit about Safavid era only through the neighborings. Like we know that some of the musicians from Iran went to Ottoman court. And we know that the tradition existing in the geographical region that we call Iran now was similar to what happened later there, at least in parts.
Yeah.
But we are sure that they were more or less following the same ideas of composing that Abdul Qadir Maraghi and the others were writing about. So whatever happened in between, like from Safavid time to Qajar time, is either a sort of evolution, that something changed shape, or it was another part of the music culture that was not taking the spotlight, that was not taking the stage, and then it emerged. It somehow came out with the next generation. I mean, you know, it's a side subject, but you know that tar, which is taken as one of the main instruments in Persian Dastgah music, and everybody kind of worships it like the king.
Yeah.
We have no clue of it before Safavid. I mean, even in Safavid times, there is no writing about it, no mention of it anywhere, no picture in any miniature painting, nothing, just simply nothing. I mean, we have setar, we have dotar, we have kamanche, we have ney, we have oud. I mean, all these instruments were being actively presented in different ways. But there's no tar, there's no santur. And these two have become the, as I said, the kings, the sultans of the Dastgah music in the last 200 years or so, which can bring another hypothesis that these could have been active elsewhere. And they kind of took the chance to become the king. It was their turn to become kings. Before that, it was the oud, which was like taken as the main instrument, the reference instrument, and so on. This is a side subject. I just wanted to say that we are not that clear about what was going on before Darwish Khan and Waziri and Sabah. But what we know about what they did, for example, for Sabah, well, let me start with Waziri first. Waziri was very good at what was happening on tar and Dastgah music for his own time. He had learned it all with the masters of his time. And he was intelligent, had a good memory, so he could play all the radif stuff. And if you like me to explain a bit more about radif, we can talk about that too. And he was a virtuoso on tar. So what he composed, in my opinion, or I put it this way, was a kind of mix of these. Yes. Like he wanted to show, or let's say like this, he wanted to provide a tar player with the opportunity of some music which has the content of the Dastgah music, but is pushing for higher skills on the instrument and also kind of expand on the frontiers of what you can do on that instrument. And I personally see his compositions more or less in this kind of vein, that he was pushing for. I guess he was also a bit influenced by how a violin player, for example, in a concerto was showing. I mean, not just the instrument, not just the music, but also the possibilities that instrument can offer to that content. So I think Vaziri was partly consciously or unconsciously influenced by that too. And he was also very good and skillful on tar, and he probably had some personal creativity, very active. So he created pieces which were more or less fixed, in the sense that you had the opening, you had this melody, that melody, a passage in between. It was all the content of Dastgah at the same time, though. Like it was, for example, this Dukhtarak Julide that I said as an example starts with Chargah. It's in the Dastgah Chargah. It starts with the main maya of Chargah, the Daramad area, and then it moves to Zabul, which is the next maya in the journey of Chargah. Then it has a part in Mukhalif. I mean, it is presenting the Dastgah content, but it's bringing it in a very specific way of dealing with the instrument. It's not just the melody. So it's the melody, it's metric piece, most of it, and it's also using all the possibilities of picking patterns, going through the strings, difficult fingerings. So it was in that direction, I can say. What Sabah did with his pieces was partly similar to that. And on top of that, he was also trying to translate possibilities of the violin, which was not that common in Persian music before him, to kind of bring that or adapt it to the content of Dastgah music. And for that, he used very smartly, he used many possibilities of the instrument to show the phrasings and the melodies of Dastgah music even better. I mean, they were playing many similar Dastgah stuff on kamanche before, but that fell out of fashion for many decades because people kind of realized that violin had a lot of other things to offer. But well, later the traditionalists kind of took it back. They said, no, that was in worship of the Western culture and we don't want it, blah, blah. That's another story. And for example, Sabah has a piece called Bezendan, and it's in the Maqam Shushtari, but it's full of technique. If you want to play it, you can even take it as an etude because it takes a lot of effort and practice to do it right, especially on the violin. For other instruments, it's also not easy. And well, there are other pieces by him that, like Dar Qafas, simple melodies. In cage, we can translate that. Bezendan is also in prison, in translation. So I think these are also, you could put them in the program still. So they could serve the purpose of a char mezrab in that sense. But they are not char mezrabs because they don't depend on a picking pattern necessarily. I could also think that they are taking the idea of what was behind Char Mezrab a bit further, a bit more organized, let's say.
Yeah, interesting, very clear. So let's put aside the music that's influenced by, the Western pieces and the formats and whatever, suites. This is something else. I don't want to discuss it now because our subject is about within the context of Dastgah. How much we have of those composers who are trying to get out of the tradition or maybe extend the tradition. I don't want to say slash the tradition, at least extend, bring something new, bring what we want to talk about, which is creativity. Yeah.
Before I say that, I would like to add another side to this story, which whoever is interested, a nice opportunity to check on at least two very good masters. Very good is a bit let down. Jalil Shahnaz on tar and Hassan Kasai on ney. There are two examples of creativity. They were very famous for their improvisation sessions, even on live radio programs. Whenever they played together, you could hear that they are having a real conversation in time. And that is another side of this tradition. And when you listen to them, I think this dichotomy of composition versus improvisation falls into a spectrum. It's not that you either have a composition or you have improvisation. It's like I've even heard recordings of some private sessions, like at a party when people sit together, and somebody had started the recording a bit earlier, and then one of these two, there are sometimes more, like Shajarian is also sitting there singing. One of them asks, "Okay, what would you like to play? What dastgah do you want to have?" So it's obvious that they haven't decided. And one says, let's do Abu Atta, the other one says, let's do Segah or whatever. Sometimes the youngest says, whatever you say, Ustad. So there's also a bit of ta'aruf, as we call it in Persian. And then in the end they say, okay, then Abu Atta it is. So they kind of decide together if the mood is dictating something, if there is a mood that they could share. And when they start playing, they are more or less going with this idea of a program. They start with something rather slow, which is taken as a pish daramad. Then they go for this avaz and jawab avaz. And then in between there are char mezrabs, or pieces which are metric and they have picking patterns. And then usually there is a tasnif in the end. There might come a reng, might not. So the whole form is still there. But the phrase making is partly following the content of Dastgah, but not necessarily Radif. So we have to make a distinction between Radif and Dastgah. And they are going in conversation. I have heard very, very beautiful, excellent masterpieces, like a house performance of Shajarian and Kasai, where Kasai in his Jawab Awaz is not following the singer. He's really having a conversation with him. Like the singer is saying, as if he's saying something, and he really responds to that. And then the singer will reply to what he was saying, sometimes stealing a bit of motives from one another. Or when the ney plays something, the singer, inspired or whatever you call it, is taking a part of that melody and puts the next line of poetry in a way on that melody that would match that, or takes that further. So that is still following the Dastgah content, but it's not pre-decided. And I think when you draw a line saying that this is improvisation, that is composition, it's not absolutely correct. It's not that black and white.
I want to get back to improvisation in a bit.
Okay.
At the same time, mentioning some of these masters, really, I was holding my horses not to mention them. I love them all. Yeah, but let me ask you about the difference and the distinction between Radif and Dastgah. This is very important in this discussion, and maybe go ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For some reason, in the last decades, especially outside Iran, the idea of Radif and Persian music have been taken as equal. Whenever they want to talk about this music, they say Radif. But the truth is that Radif is, let me put it in another sentence, every Radif, because there are many of them, every Radif is one example of how a master would do the content of that Dastgah or all the Dastgahs, especially when they wanted to teach it. So you could simplify by saying that Radif is an educational put together of the content of Dastgahs so that you could show it to a learner. And it has different versions. We have instrumental Radif, In general, we have vocal radif. We have vocal radif by Abdullah Dawami, vocal radif by Mahmoud Karimi. We have radif for violin by Sabah. We have radif for santur by Sabah. We have radif for santur by Faramars Paivar. We have radif for tar by Mirza Hossein Qodi, which was a brother of Mirza Abdullah, as important as him. So you can find a lot of different radifs, and they are all in the core content. They are more or less the same. I mean, when I say more or less, it's about some details that you can see a bit of differences. Like one melody is falling into Abu Atta in one radif, and in another radif it's falling into Dashti when they classify. But the main journey of a Dastgah is the same content. So I can say that Dastgah is the core content of that journey in between the maqams, which I prefer to use the word maye for, just to make it distinct from the neighboring countries that we are talking about, these small parts of the journey. In a radif, you are supposed to see examples of these, how they are happening.
Yeah, so we can say a pyramid is a Dastgah system, and the person who's looking at that pyramid from his angle or her angle is telling a radif to the students.
You can
Please
say that.
see the pyramid, it's like this from my angle, look at that and pay attention to this and that. But the overall pyramid is a model of, let's say, the nature, that's music, the Persian music of the 200 years old.
Absolutely. And what happens in these special versions of radifs is partly dependent on the instrument. Like if you have a radif for the violin, the way those melodies sit better on the violin should also be considered. Or if it's for santur, the qualities santur can bring with different kinds of using the hammers and so on is considered. If it's for tar and setar, the way you do the picking is playing a role in taking shape, the material. But the maqam journey in the Dastgah is supposed to be the same. So if I play, sorry, let me add this before I go through the example. Usually when they want to say somebody is master, someone has mastered the content of Dastgah, they say that he or she has learned with so many masters. The reason is that they believe if you see many of these examples, then you can come up with your own version. Because if you know only one radif, which unfortunately is the case nowadays with many younger people, if you only know that, okay, Dastgah music equals radif, and which radif equals the one Mirza Abdullah have taught his students, then you are afraid of doing anything else other than that. People get stuck, and then they come with this question of, okay, then how can I be creative in this music?
Exactly.
But the truth is that the surface of that radif, Mirza Abdullah, for example, if you understand the inner content, then you are not limited. If it's difficult for you to see through the surface and find the inner content, then they usually encourage you to do other ones. Like, for example, I always tell people that, are you playing Daramad Segah? Then please take a look at Daramad Segah in vocal radif by Dawami too. And then listen to many examples of Segah being performed, at least only the Daramad part. Then you will see that, okay, they are very similar, but the way they are being presented are not exactly the same. So the phrasings you can find, or the options for phrasings around the shahid in that maqam and so on, then you come up with bigger treasure as vocabulary. Let's take them as vocabulary in the language. You have a bigger memory treasure you can use.
Interesting. Before we go to improvisation, let's take some examples of the pieces. For example, Arang and Afshari by Darwish Khan, or Paivar, or many others, right? These guys are following, or these masters are following the Dastgah, and they are doing it in the same cycle. And there are some cases where we see masters like Asadullah Malik doing the cry of Lily, or maybe his own Isfahan Char Mudrab.
Mhm.
Are they still within the system? Are they adding something new? Are they violating some of the rules of these Dastgahs?
No, they are not violating anything. If you're taking Asadullah Malik, for example, let me bring a bit of a light to another point in history. When radio started in Iran, there came, as far as I've heard from the older ones, I wasn't there yet, but there came a daily program of about, I think it was about 15 minutes. I've forgotten the exact duration. They called it Taknavazan. Taknavaz in Farsi means solos. And they would ask musicians of that capacity to come and sit together, usually in groups of three, and just live play something together. And actually, in this type of music, the master level is taken as you should be able to really manage in the moment. You are not supposed to play somebody else's composition. You are not even supposed to play your own composition necessarily. It shows how good you are if you manage to sit with someone and play together, and you are open to the how to call it, the improvisation of the moment, really. Yeah. Improvisation in the sense of you really see what is happening in that moment and act accordingly. Decide for what melody you want, what tuning is happening, how to adapt to the other musician, and just to have a dialogue. And in those programs, because it was also happening a lot, as far as I know, it was every day, maybe weekly. I'm not sure. It probably differed from year to year. And there was a later version called Ham Navazan, but that was also another series of programs with the same concept. They are using the content of Dastgah still. So when they play Afshari together, you hear the same kind of mood, the same kind of maqam content. But they are not following anything pre-decided. So they let it happen. They just follow the time that, okay, time is finished. We can't go for more than, let's say, 15 minutes or 20 or wow. Yeah. I think it was between 10 and 15 minutes, I'm not sure. So that was the only limitation. The rest was their... what they call tarihe. It comes from Arabic. I don't know the English word. Kind of taste, but in the sense that you can come up with something of your own. Yeah. Tasteful creativity, let's say. Right? But it's not creativity in the sense of you create something from zero. It is like you share some things with each other from the background of the culture. Everybody in that group knows what they call the melody contours, the phrasings of, let's say, Afshari, how they usually go. Everybody in that group knows what is after Daromad in Afshari. It goes to another, you can have Jame Daron, for example, and how you make Jame Daron. So this is the shared knowledge.
Foundation is common.
Yes, it's like speaking the same language. So if I sit with somebody, if we are having a conversation and we know what language we are going to speak, we might even limit it and say, let's discuss lines of poetry from Ghazal number blah blah in Hafiz works. If we limit ourselves to that, and we know what Hafiz had written, but we are allowed to use this word, that word, this part of the verse, that part of the verse, and it goes and comes back. It doesn't mean that we are necessarily creating a new piece of poetry ourselves. So this falls again into that idea of what is improvisation, right? Exactly. Is it it's black and white or not? I think what they did was more free, but they were not violating anything. And because people were easily sitting listening to it, they didn't expect a full program like in a concert. They were even at home or in their shops or in their cars driving, whatever, and the radio was on. And in the afternoon, I know that the hour was also in the early afternoon. It created a sort of mood. And usually there was no singer, so they were just takhnavaz in the soloist of on an instrument. Most of the work Asadullah Malik was presenting, and also my teacher, Mansour Nariman, was of that type. It brings some qualities with itself. I think those who criticize these programs, they say that there's a lack of form in them, in the sense of structure to follow. You can easily get lost in the sense that you don't know where in the program you are. Any minute could be any other minute, right? I mean, if you very loosely take the definition of what they call rhythm in movies, and then they talk, this movie didn't have a good rhythm. It means that the structure was in a way that you wouldn't realize where in the story you are. But usually in good movies, even if you just switch to a channel and it's in the middle of something you hadn't seen before, you can somehow feel, oh, this movie is about to finish. In that sense, those who criticize these free performances, they say there's a lack of structure. But of course, there are also people who love them and have no problem with that.
Actually, thank you to bring this. Actually, this is one of my questions, the techno-Adhan phenomena, and you hit into the improvisation. I think this has brought and added great value to the music, because this is like part of the technology, part of the modern or contemporary need that really brought up the idea of techno-Adhan. Right, so I am sure this has brought new things that were created out of this practice for the musicians themselves, for the practitioners, for maybe even those who really observe what happened and what has changed.
I think you don't even need to evaluate it like that. I think music is, this is my very personal opinion, of course, is a very wild world. I mean, it's a very wide world of many wild also at times. Is as diverse as human relationships. Sometimes you just want to sit and talk with your friends. Sometimes you want to have an announcement. Sometimes you want to listen to a story. Sometimes you want to perform a theatrical piece. I mean, sometimes it's just a one-on-one, very private, intimate conversation about some very personal feelings of some sort. I mean, music can be as diverse as all these, even more, right? So limiting it to only one type, one kind of attitude in doing music is a mistake from the beginning. If somebody says that music has to be like this, it's, to me, it equals saying that people have to be this way and not that way. All the relationships should be like this and not nothing else. And I personally remember once I was in a car with somebody, and she asked me she had some, I don't know what music it was, but she had some CD playing in the car, and she asked my opinion on that. And I said, well, this is not a person I would like to socialize with. And then she said, you mean the singer? I said, no, I mean the music. And she said, you socialize with music? And I told her that for me, any music is like a person or a group of people that you encounter. With some people, you exchange a lot of thoughts. You talk about what you have discovered lately, or what you are thinking about, what your problems in the sense of you want to solve them are. You might talk about philosophy, you might talk about history, whatever, something very mental. With some people, you might just exchange emotions. You might just express how you feel, either for them or for somebody else, but it's a matter of exchanging emotional content. For some people, you might do a very provoking lecture. I don't know what to call them. And there are people you enjoy sitting with or listening to. There are people you might not like to have any communication with. So for me, there is a very wide variety of these communication types, and Taknavazan was, in my opinion, was very normal sampling of the very good musicians who would be doing rather the same thing in small groups.
Yeah.
Like, of this I'm sure, when Mansour Nariman and Asadullah Malik and the others would gather together at any of their houses with some guests, they would do the same thing. They would sit together and they would say, okay, what would you like to play? It was like part of their communication. It wasn't a concert in the sense that, okay, everybody is on the other side and we are on the stage. No, it was a very natural thing to sit and enjoy some communication through music. And of course, the others were also enjoying. And I think they took that part of it to the radio. Because these musicians were good, they were very skillful on their instruments. They were also flexible in how to work with the other musicians. They were not dictating anything to one another. And they because they were doing it on a regular basis, weekly, or I don't really know if it was once a week or more, that gave them more incentive as well to get even more productive. So in that sense, I'm sure it had a lot of positive effect on how they worked and what they did. But in its own, I don't think there is any need to see any other end for that. Like saying that, was it good because it would give some practice to or some effect on this and that? No, I think it was just like what people would have in smaller circles taken onto the radio, and that was nice enough.
Yeah, interesting. But maybe this has carried over to the new generation when they listen to this. I mean, the gathering is only for a group of people who see each other in a small space. Now this is on the radio.
Yeah.
But maybe let this go. Let me ask you about the improvisation, and which links maybe to Teknawazan and to composition. How do we perceive improvisation in this kind of music?
May I first say something regarding to a much earlier question you put forward, but I managed to distract you. you
Giving you the
asked,
freedom.
thanks.
Yeah.
Freedom for me is one of the most valuable qualities that one has to seek.
Yeah.
You asked me about those who might go out of the tradition or extend the tradition.
Yes.
And who didn't follow. They were not lured by the Western ideas. They were still working in the tradition.
Yeah.
From the generation, you can, well, of course, Abul Hassan Saba is taken like what they call him is Ustadul Asatid, the master of masters. Because he also taught a lot, and many good musicians of the next generation were his pupils. And they were as diverse as you can imagine. I mean, we have songwriters among them, we have virtuosos on their instruments among them. I mean, like two sides of the spectrum. From that time on, we have people who tried to, I wouldn't say extend, I would say personalize the tradition. Like using a language to write your own story. Of course, you can never say that this person was not influenced by anything else, because a person is always, especially an artist, or well, I didn't mean artist in any credibility sense, but anybody who takes himself as an artist, they are sensitive. They are supposed to be open to inspiring stuff. So even with, for example, Ali Tajbidi, the very creative composer of many songs, which are still very popular among Iranians, they are very to the core of Dastgah, but very simplified. He had this very special talent of managing to put melodies that were coming from Dastgah content, but in a very simple looking context with words that people could sing. Many of them were things people could just simply sing, even if they didn't have that much of a voice of a singer. So you could compare them. Some musicians from the next generations thought these are too simple. We can't take these as classical compositions. But the truth is that they were also happening at the time that vinyl records became common. So industry again has a role. I mean, we were talking about radio. The other side of the same story is the production of vinyl records. And they were being produced and sold on the market. So having songs was like, the thing. Like these days, people make things for Instagram. I mean, there was a time that people, because Instagram didn't allow anything longer than 1 minute, they were even asking for videos of only 1 minute. Industry can somehow force things to fall into. Anyway, Ali Tajbidi was making songs which were ideal for these 45 RPM vinyl records, and they were very popular, so people were buying them, listening to them, singing them. Even the lyrics on papers were sold in streets. That is one way of personalizing the Dastgah tradition. The other way of doing it was what was happening in the generation of Parviz Meshkatian, Hossein Alizadeh, Mohammad Reza Lotfi, Mohammad Reza Shajarian, and the younger ones. I mean, they were young around the end of Pahlavi times, the beginning of Islamic Republic. But they became the next masters. What they tried to do was more of a back to more traditional in a way, but still personalize it. When somebody like Lotfi is improvising, he is to the core of Dastgah. He doesn't do anything out of the. I mean, the most. I don't know what word to use for that. The most extreme I've heard from him was a program he published on a cassette when he was in America, let's say about 30 years ago or so, where he starts in Esfahan and finishes in Shur. That is like the very strange, if you want to take it in the format of tradition, where you start, you should finish. So if you start in Esfahan, you are supposed to go back to Esfahan. But this was like the extreme of Mohammad Reza Lotfi, to start in Esfahan. A very beautiful Pish Daramad, beautiful Charmes job. Then in a solo, he takes the path of Oshaq in Esfahan, which is very similar to Shur. He takes it to Abu Atta, and there a very beautiful Charmes job, and then he finishes with a Tasnif, which is in Shur. And that's it. So that is the way he personalized it. But the way, for example, somebody like Hossein Alizadeh personalized and took the tradition further was very different. He has, for example, a lot of duets for tars, or two tars playing together. He was, for a time, he was working with one of his best pupils, Arshad Tahmasbi, and they performed a couple of those pieces, which one of the best is put on the album Dil Shodegan under the name of Tar o Pud. It's so brilliantly beautiful. It's all the content of Dashti, nothing out of Dashti. But when you listen to it, both the texture, the way it's being presented, and the way the sounds of tar are weaving into one another, merging and going out, and so is something you hadn't heard before. So it's quite innovative, but still very loyal to the content of Dashti. Well, he has other works which are a bit further, but this was tar playing. I mean, this was still to the very core traditional stuff of what he was doing. I think those who became popular in a positive sense among music lovers were always those who personalized it one way or another. Those who only copied what was happening were, at best, they were taken as very good teachers. They were never taken as content producers. I mean, if you follow the list of works Shajarian has done, which is a lot. I mean, if you just have a list of his albums and recordings and whatever came out from this work, it's so much that following each and every one takes a lifetime. Among them are big masterpieces as well. But every one of them is good. And all of it is in the realm of this Dastgah tradition. But he's making his own melodies. He's using his own connections. He's doing his own, what we call murakkab, which means traveling from the usual journey of a Dastgah to another Dastgah, like connecting this cycle to another cycle and then bringing it back. And he has brilliant examples of those, plus the technique and so on and so forth. So I think all of these figures did the taking further or developing the tradition in a personalized way. He knew all of them knew the stuff that they were dealing with, but they did it their own way.
Interesting. What are the examples? Maybe let's highlight some example pieces or albums of these masters.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I think I have to think a bit to remember what the name of that album by Lutfi was. It was an album he did with Zoya Sabet, the singer. He was actually, it was mixed. It wasn't a performance. He had played the kamanche himself, the tar himself, and also the tombak. And the singer was Zoya Sabet. But I think the name of the album is Ey Ashiqan, but I'm not sure because the ending tasnif was Ey Ashiqan, meaning you lovers. That is rather, I mean, in the sense I was explaining about how Lutfi personalized it or got out of the tradition. Yeah. Not really out of the tradition, but very personalized. With Shajarian, well, there are so many examples, but there is a very, very famous album of his and Parviz Meshkatian, Nawa Murakkab. It is. It starts with Nawa, finishes in Nawa, but during the whole album, there are parts which he travels to Segah and Bayat Turk and very beautifully take them back, as if he knew all the possible connections, how to travel from one place to another. Like there were tunnels, like hidden tunnels that not everybody was familiar with, but he had found them. He had kind of explored around them and he could go back home because in the tradition, it's also tricky. If you go somewhere and you get lost, you are supposed to be able to go back. So Nawa Murakkab is one of them. Very beautiful, a very, very beautiful composition of a tasnif by Parviz Meshkatian in the end. It's Jan Jahan, the name of that dance composition. And there is also Humayun Masnavi by Muhammad Reza Shajarian. That is a very good example for how a whole performance could be. In that album, I think it's about maybe even more than 90% is free rhythm. Very few parts are in pulsation, any beats or rhythmic cycle, very few. and he is performing Homayun as a Dastgah, but he is switching to other parts, and then suddenly you find yourself in Deilaman, and then you ask yourself, oh, but wasn't this album Homayun? How come I ended in Deilaman? Deilaman belonged to Dashti. And then a bit later you see, oh, I'm back in Homayun. How did that happen? And he uses passages and the way he connects them that makes it sound so fluent. But that's also another example of being in the realm of tradition, but very personalized and innovative. He's putting his creativity in that direction. Hossein Alizadeh has a lot of wider range. I mean, he has some albums which are more traditional, but they are usually either as ensemble performances of for example, there is one Sobgahi, which starts with a composition originally from Hassan Kasai, but Alizadeh has arranged it for an ensemble in a very beautiful way. He has used the tone colors of different instruments in a very beautiful way. But the content is from a solo Hassan Kasai had played in Chargah. But he puts it in the, yes, Salam is the name of it. And that's a whole program like any other traditional. But you can also find from Alizadeh the album Razeno, in which he is using 4 singers, well, mainly 3 singers, but he and the percussion player are also singing. He's singing at very few parts, but the percussion player is singing all the time. So let's say 4 singers, 1 instrument he's playing, and percussion. And in there, he hasn't just used 4 voices at the same time, which is a fully composed performance. I mean, they all know the details of what is going to happen. If it was shaped during the rehearsals or not, I have no idea. But what they performed on stage and then in the album was fully decided, at least for the singers.
Yeah.
And there is also a tasnif in the end, which is fully composed, and the shape is fixed. It's not going to change. And on top of what he used on the lines of the singers, he has created a combination of 2 maqams as a new, he call it maqam dad u bidad, but I personally can call it dastgah because it follows the same idea of a journey in a cycle. And for those who don't know it, dad is a maqam that we usually perform in Mahur, and bidad is a maqam we usually perform in the cycle of Homayun, and they are different. And Alizadeh made a structure or a phrasing pattern for different sections of this journey, which would connect them almost constantly. I mean, the opening starts with something in Dad and immediately falls into Bidad. Again, the next paragraph does the same, but takes it a bit further. And then in a 3rd or 4th chapter or paragraph of the performance, it takes it to Homayun itself. Yeah. And then from there it brings it down to Bidad. And I mean, all these connections are not there in the traditional Dastgah, or as some people say, it's not in the Radif. Yeah. But he's using the same content. He's not inventing anything new, but the way he's putting them together is personalized. So I call it Alizadeh's composition. It's a composition, and it's loyal to the Dastgah content still.
So this is like building and creating from the inside, compared to borrowing from the outside, which has no problem actually, but it has to have a mind that's not do-it-yourself, or a crafter mind, or somebody who's too fanatic about maybe the tradition, a fundamentalist about the tradition. Right?
I think I need to well, I'm talking too much maybe, but let me
tell me.
Let me make a remark before we go further on that. I think you should always be open to perceiving things from the outside. Doesn't matter where it comes from.
Yes.
It's out there in the world. The problem starts when you just imitate. Doesn't matter who you imitate. If I imitate Sabah only, it can be for the purpose of learning and understanding what he has done and how he has done it. Blah, blah, that's perfectly fine. That's a part of my education, and anybody's education it can be. I'm exploring through his glasses how these phrasings were happening. Blah, blah. But if the moment I start only copying him, it means I have nothing to say myself.
Exactly.
And then if I don't have anything to say myself, why would you sit and listen to me? You go and listen to Sabah. I might become only a performer of what Sabah has created before, fine. Then for that, I'm not copying. You can take Shakespeare's plays to stage for I don't know how many millions of times. But that is Shakespeare's work. You can recite Hafiz's poetry, I don't know for how many millions of times. That is his poetry. But if I want to write something, I'm not just reciting somebody else's work. In brackets, even reciting somebody else's work in a way could be somehow personalized. But I'm not talking about that now. If I want to claim that I'm not performing somebody else's work, then I shouldn't be only copying. That copying belonged to the stage of learning. Then if I want to perform somebody else's work, then I have to try to understand it well. I have to see how I should put it into practice the right way, either in the museum way or in a more contemporary way. So I think there is a distinction. I think many people fall into the trap of copying. They get so fascinated by something they see, either from their own culture or from another culture, doesn't make that much difference. They suddenly think, oh my God, Johann Sebastian Bach is the god of music. Fine. Okay, what do I do now? I try to play Bach on my oud. Fine. And then what do I get out of it? As far as its exploration, I have every right. But if I want to use it to say how good I am, it doesn't really fall into place.
And for the crafter part of composition?
For the crafter part, that's partly learning. Like I can, for example, I can play. Parviz Mishkatian was very good with char mizrabs. Well, he was also a santur player, so no surprise there. Parviz Mishkatian and Faramars Paivar both have great char mizrabs. Now I'm an oud player. I want to play char mizrabs, or I want to explore char mizrabs, let's say. I can try playing theirs, which I do at times. And sometimes I even try to adapt them for the oud, which is another exploration stage. And I learn a lot from them. But they are not what I'm producing. I might be producing them for the sense of, okay, let's try to see how it's like translation. I'm translating something to another. But still, it's not my work. Somebody else's work.
Yeah, interesting. And let's have a break, but before that, the hanging question of improvisation.
Oh, okay. So I think with all this now, the grounds are a lot more prepared to talk about what I can say as improvisation. In this music culture, in the Dastgah music, which not just I think, a lot of people do believe, that has a very close connection with the language. I think all the musicians have some common codes in mind on different levels. Some of these codes, they might be not aware of it, not consciously doing it, but some of these codes are rhythmic figures, some patterns, like the most famous one is kereshme. Da-dam, da-dam, da-da-dam, dam. Every musician knows that. I mean, in Persian Dastgah system. There are other ones as well. So they know this, they know the area of each maqam and how they usually are connected with the other ones in one Dastgah. Some of them are better. They also know the connection between this Dastgah and the other one, or how you transpose this and connect it with the other. I mean, these technical material, and also some key motives that happen in one or I mean all these ingredients of what we call a maqam. They all share it. And then when they want to perform, either alone or with other musicians, it's like writing or speaking. They make phrases, they make sentences based on what they had in mind. Sometimes it turns out to be very beautiful, sometimes it's just okay. I mean, if you grade them, some of them can become like an interview on what you see on TV, that you ask somebody's opinion. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm protesting. I'm happy. Simple things. Some of them might come into more serious stuff, like discussing some personal discoveries of some feeling. Some of them might sound very harmonious and sound nice and grab the listener into a world of emotions. I think that's also what languages can do. But you put them under different categories. You say this is beautiful novel writing, this is poetry, this is news language. You categorize them differently. I think the same can happen in production of what we call music. But somehow we forget that they could be different and we compare them. Anyway, I got a bit further from what I wanted to say. What I think is very common in this music, in the Dastgah music, as improvisation, is using this treasure of what they have memorized or is somehow sitting in the back of their mind, and they make their new sentences or phrases with them, using them. The less they show where these come from, the more novel they sound. Let me give you a personal example, and then I guess I can somehow conclude. I was preparing for a performance a couple of years ago in Tehran, which was supposed to be a series of solos on the oud. I was one of the performers. And I had planned for a structure of a 3-part segah performance. And for one part, I thought of, there is a Masnavi in Chargah that Shajarian had sung in the album Dastan. And I love that melody making. It's just magnificent. And I thought this would be really sounding beautiful if I take it to segah. Do the same melody movement, but in segah, and play it on the oud. And the moment I started playing that on the oud in segah, I thought, but this sounds very familiar. And then a bit later, I realized that this was actually an old tasnif in segah, at least the first melody. I don't know if Shajarian did it consciously or unconsciously, but I couldn't stop laughing in that moment.
That's reverse engineering.
I had no idea I just loved that melody, and I thought, okay, it would be nice to switch it to segah instead of chargah, and it would sit in the context of what I wanted to have as a performance. And then I realized that, okay, this is consciously or unconsciously coming from that melody of that tasnif. So this is probably what is happening to many musicians. I think a lot is happening unconsciously.
Interesting. And is there anything similar to what we have in Arabic music, like Taksim? Or
yes, I think so, but that is usually happening. This is a very personal judgment, might be wrong. I think Taksim has a different role in a program, which is usually connecting parts and giving a bit of a role to a soloist. It's not that long. It's not taking that much of a journey in the sense of a Dastgah journey. But what I can find similar to that is when we, in the course of program, after a Pish Daramad or anything that plays the role of Pish Daramad, we have a short instrumental couple of phrases before it gets to either Avaz or Char Mizrab. The role of those phrases are usually to present the mood of that maqam with some phrasing on the instrument. And I think that is more similar to Taksim.
Interesting.
If I'm not mistaken about how Taksim is made.
Now, our viewers are going to enjoy a break, let's choose one of your pieces.
Shall we give some information about the piece or after listening, maybe?
Let's maybe listen to it, then go ahead for an elaboration.
Okay, certainly.
What piece will that be?
I had composed a piece I titled Mirror the Voice.
All right.
And
We'll
it's
listen.
not just listening, it's also watching. So I hope it doesn't frighten
So,
anybody.
guys, if you are listening to this through a podcast program or SoundCloud, turn on the screen.
Yeah, you have to
Right.
check the YouTube version as well, if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Let's listen to this and come back.
Thanks. پرم که روی صدایم نماز
So, Dr. Nagar, please tell us about this piece and what's happening in here.
A chaos. If you watched it, you realize that there are three figures in this in the picture, at least, and also in the sound. I become three persons, and well, the joke a very dear person to me made about it was that, oh, we had the idea of three witches in old literature. But that was not my intention. The idea in this piece is I'm taking three sides of a person, which in this case is me. I'm putting them into a conversation. And the lines they are using for the conversation are coming from two different pieces of poetry by Forough Farrokhzad, which is a contemporary poet. She died about, I don't know how many years ago that was, before I was born, so it's more than 50 years ago. And the lines are, you have the translations. I've put the translations to English under the video, so you can kind of connect them. But the main thing is that she's focusing on sound is the only thing that remains. And it also finishes with a line that is telling the main person in my story. I have put these together. There are elements I have put together to create, to personalize my play. So this piece of mine is more like a theatrical piece with three figures doing a dialogue. They are each using the same oud and the same voice. But they are also talking with each other. I might usually do it even in one performance, but people might realize that these are different sides of me, might not. But here I have visualized these three ghosts somehow. And I also recommend that if anybody would like to listen again, it's much clearer if you could listen with headphones, because maybe the mixing could have been done a bit better. Well, let's hope for another version later. Anyway, the lines are in a conversation between a side which is emotionally, let's say, under pressure or hurt, or expressing sorrow. Another side which is more gone to higher levels of peace, in a sense, and talking of lines which are about light and things that could give you peace. And the center, these two are facing each other. The center figure, which is more in the presence, which is not in my mind, but it's me, basically. That is announcing. And then when hearing the conversation coming in between is saying that I feel so brimly full that people can say prayers on my voice. This is one of the most beautiful lines in the original poetry. And then in the end, she comes back with the line that says, ask the mirror the name of your savior. So this whole conversation based on these lines of poetry, which I've taken from here and there in bigger pieces of poetry, are also based on elements in three different music cultures. One is coming from what in very old Maqam Kurdish music is called hora, which is basically a very crude vocal quality, like that kind of pushy air sound. That is one side of the story. The other side, which is expressing the peacefulness, is an inspiration I got from what Zoroastrians do in the ritual they call yasna. There they mainly use 2-3 tones to just recite the holy text they have. So it's not supposed to be a melodic in any sense. And it's not for a performance of music or any song, but only to recite the text. So these two are the two figures facing each other. But the main figure in the middle is using melodies from Dastgah music, partly in Bayat Turk, partly in Esfahan, especially in the end. And I've tried to put these elements in a way that they make a texture of a mental conversation, let's say, which in the end concludes in you have to ask the mirror the name of who you are looking for or who you are hoping for. I hope I have managed to do it in the way I wanted, but this is not improvised in any sense, but it's also not written in all the details of what note at what moment. I put the structure on a paper, what I wanted when, and if anybody looks at my paper, they would think that this is, what is this? This is meaningless, because there are seconds, there are lines of poetry, and there are 3 columns of who is having the line to speak, let's say.
That might be a new music notation.
Could be taken as, but I found that working for this context. And of course I had to take the timing into account, like these would work with each other, because we weren't doing it really live. I mean, I was recording each of these witches separately, and then I mixed them together.
Interesting. Very.
Yeah, so for the, if I may show a little bit on the oud, very simple movements for the hora part. This was the movement of what I based the sukuchi. This was a very little motive. I built the whole character of the woman on the left side based on this. And then in the end, so I have basically 3 notes. And and then a transposition of that, but on a on this level. This is what is used for the Zoroastrian yasna. I can't remember the lines of poetry in the moment, but that's how it's happening here. So basically, I'm creating a texture of at times together, and bringing in the words, the syllables of poetry on top of these, and sometimes only with the voice, no syllables. But in the middle, where the main figure is singing the line I told you about, which goes to Bayat Turk, I'm using this brings in a whole Dastgah content directly to the audience. And then in the end, in very end, which we have Isfahan, there's also this. And then the very, very end takes it to the. This is where it finishes. That's how it ends itself. So the person in the middle, which is the contemporary person, sort of, is bringing in Isfahan and Bayat Turk, basically, there. And what I've used, I don't think it's anything out of the concept of maqam music. Maybe some older roots, maybe too simplified in the older times, which then manages to develop into these 2 points, which I'm using the same. This was the notes I was using for the yasna part, but then bringing in the note in between. This is also built on the same set of notes that I was using for the Zoroastrian yasna, for example. I mean, it's all a matter of inspiration. I'm not constructing anything. Even when the idea came to my mind, I wasn't thinking of these maqams at all. I had the idea of I want this, I want that, and how can I connect them? And then I started singing around these melodies, and then they connected somehow. And then I put them on the instrument, and I realized, oh, okay, that is what I'm using. So the part of the connection was not a construction, let's say, that the knowledge was giving shape by itself to what elements I had in hand.
Interesting.
But I had been using this, for example, when we talk about ajnas, when you say we have this, if I use this fa, we say I'm playing something in mahud, for example. So these are the notes. But if I just change that fa, I can switch to Bayat Turk. And this is something everybody knows in Persian Dastgah music. I've just personalized that knowledge and that melody into this setting. And I'm not the only one who does it, actually. The example of Dod or Bidad, or Dod and Bidad that we talked about, is using, it's not exactly the same attitude, it's not exactly the same approach, but I would say that I'm not far from that. What he did with, let's say we have Dod here. This is our mahur. Then when you play Dod, you go on this tone. And sometimes you can start with. This would be Dod. And then what Bidad is that and what Alizadeh did there was, at least in the beginning, was simply, I mean, if you put it on the paper, then you say, well, this is so simple. You just change from this gens to to this gens. You are changing one tone, this mi, or this interval between re and mi, you're making it smaller. But he managed to do a whole set of melodies. When you listen to the album, he starts with this, which is another interesting thing he did. He borrowed a melody form from another Dastgah. It's called Reng Usul. He brought it into this Dad and Bidad, Dad and Bidad. He re-performed it with a new stuff. And one other thing, when you can manage to, and then, when you can do this, then when you go up, you can have the Bidad up there. And you are in Humayun. So this gens, which was like this, here, before that, when you started, was. So when you listen to it, it has a lot of its own ups and downs mood-wise. I mean, we are talking about modal music, meaning we are going through different modes. If you take them as creating moods, then this is absolutely bringing a lot of waves in its sort of emotions. And it first performed the first album it was published as was Razano, but then later they did another program with Kayhan Kalhor and Mohammad Reza Shajarian and Humayun Shajarian on trombek, and that was based on the same movements and based on the same maqam Dad o Bidad as a whole program again. But this time, if you listen to it, it sounds very, very different. This time it was following the poetry of Mehdi Akhavan Sales, which was picturing a society after the coup against Mossadegh and how a lot of hopes had just it became ashes, and a lot of hopes for change and whatnot were turned into nothing. And I think there it also sits very nicely. I mean, these two programs, Razeno and It's Winter, Zemestanas in Farsi, are quite different, but they come from this Maqam Dad o Bidad that Alizadeh put together. You wanted to call it composition, you want to call it innovation, you want to call it whatever, but it was, in my opinion, it was a very personalized way of a big ocean of Dastgah music.
Yeah. This is very interesting, Dr. Negar. Thank you very much, really. I would like to move to your own work, your own compositions, your own view of personalization. But before that, let's maybe give a note about the idea of improvisation. We don't want to oversimplify all types of improvisations by saying they are all named improvisations. So there is taqsim, there is, you said qariha, you said badaha, you said, maybe give us some comments about this, not to confuse some of our...
Right. Yeah, very good point. I think what happened also in translation, whatever was seen through a different lens. I mean, when you want to speak another language, such words become a bit critical, right? When they were seeing, by they, I don't know who I mean even, were they really Westerners who were looking at this music, or whoever brought in the first time the word...
Arabs talking about your music, or you talking about Arabs, or all sorts of language.
Absolutely. When you see a list of what is happening in a program, when they write number 1, this, number 2, that, number 3, what, and then they say improvisation. You could expect something what we call bedahe in Farsi, which is supposed to be happening in the moment, or being created in the moment, right? But it might be not that at all. It might be actually something fully decided before, fully composed before. But by fully decided, I mean the musician has decided absolutely what he wants to play or sing. The performance is shaped before. because it's free rhythm, it might change a bit in durations, but it's not improvised. But sometimes it might be really improvised. It might be out of the moment. That I remember Mansour Nariman, my teacher, would say that in many cases, he doesn't know what he wants to play if he's alone. He just plays the first note, and then the next note will call itself. It kind of follows what is happening before. That is 100% improvisation, let's say. Well, he was still, I'm sure, using the words or the treasure we were talking about in the memory, but that is something every musician does, right? In different music cultures, you might have different things that you store. Like, for example, chord progressions in some Western genres of music are known. Like how you travel between this chord and that chord, and then you go here and there in different keys. That is kind of pre-decided, and they share that knowledge with each other. In this music, we do it differently, right? But we still share the vocabulary, if we call them. But by calling a taqsim an improvisation, we are bringing a wrong translation. I mean, at least a bit misleading. Many of taqsims could be fully decided before you could call it composed. Yeah. Sometimes you, in my own work, I can have a lot of examples of that. I have a general decision. I know how I want to shape this, let's say, piece. Yeah. I have parts I want to perform. I know that I want a melody to begin with, which is supposed to be free rhythm. I want to go to this line of poetry afterwards. I want to have a background here, and then do a bit of pattern of picking on that. I have a structure. And I have the melody on the lines of poetry more or less shaped. But in the moment I perform it, I give myself the liberty of changing anything that I want. And this I usually call myself semi-improvised, semi-composed. Because I like it that way. I like to have the structure pre-cooked, but I also don't want to be fixed with that. I want to allow myself to change things either in detail or even a bit more than that. And it happens that I have performed the same composition of mine in different performances. And then those who are listening would say, oh, but the one I had heard before was very different from this one. So I call it semi-composed. I don't know how other people see it, because I have the content prepared, but when I'm performing, I allow the moment to play its role.
Interesting. Now let's switch to your own personalized view of composition, your own work, the way you perceive what needs to be done. What do you need to compose? Like, what
you came to the most difficult one, yeah.
At least reveal some secrets.
At least. Yeah. What should I do at most? Well, I think I would like to say something which might clarify something other than, I mean, it will set the grounds for my approach, which is not only mine. I think whoever we talked about so far also, hopefully for me, would fit to the same category, but just to set the grounds a bit more clearly. Yeah. I think in any tradition, not just in music, even let's say poetry, any tradition that has a rich heritage, there are two extreme attitudes that can happen. Yeah. One extreme could be what I call becoming a museum curator. Like you become the guardian and presenter of what you have received. Your job as a museum curator is to set things, choose objects, what is valuable, what is not, and then try to gather all the necessary information and the right surroundings to present it or archive it or whatever. That is an extreme approach, I think, for some cultural heritage of any sort. The other extreme approach would be to say that, no, I want to disconnect from that. I want to be very innovative, totally novel. I mean, you might even see creativity as a label to whatever is the furthest possible from that. And in any content, you can see examples of these. I mean, in poetry, especially in Persian poetry, because it has a very huge heritage. I mean, we have numerous poets we know, we have received their stuff, let alone the ones we don't know anything about. It has happened there too. I mean, those who were the followers and the keepers of tradition. I call them the guardians of tradition. And in music, it can happen too, which has happened. I mean, we have a lot of musicians, even in my generation, whose job has become to say, is this right to do it this way? I mean, as if we are dealing with a religion. Like if I do a mezrab the other way around, I might go to hell. I don't know if anybody still believes in the idea of hell in that sense or not. But anyway, they are dealing it that way. They are dealing with it that way. That there is a right and wrong, and there's only one way of doing it right. And that is the way Mirza Abdullah, for example, was doing it, or Lotfi was doing it. I don't know, whoever. And the examples of the other side, which are those who escape from the heritage, is a bit, in my opinion, a bit funny, because if you really want to disconnect from whatever you have received, you will have to start from scratch. And where is that scratch? I mean, practically. Are you using the intervals that are used in Dayat Turk, in Esfahan, in Shur? No, you're not. Okay, what are you using? Are you going back in time to the times that, for example, Zoroastrian Yasna was being used for reciting holy? Where are you putting your first ground of material? You have to start from something. So in this sense, I think those who are disconnecting without thinking about it are making a mixture of whatever they can get from anywhere. In Farsi, we have an expression, we say shotor gav palang. Shotor is a camel, gav is a cow, and palang is a leopard, right? And shotor gav palang is a mixture of different animals, which is none. So I think those who want to break from this heritage, they take refuge in something else, but they can't really disconnect. I don't know if anybody can. I mean, the furthest example I can remember was an album by Vangelis I listened to once. It was Invisible Connections. Yeah. It was really invisible connections. I mean, you would really look for something to connect from one point of music to another, I mean. Because most of the musics of the world, as far as I can understand, are presenting the listener some sort of pattern, either in time or intervals, or they are providing you with something based on which you look forward to the next coming.
Level 1, level 2. Yeah.
And then you try to make connection between these and make sense of the whole material. It affects you emotionally too, but when you are mindfully listening to it, you try to find connections. Yeah. How this moment connects to the previous one. That's how we think and move, right? And in our whole lives, we try to connect to yesterday. We try to connect with other people from here and there. Anyway, in that album of Invisible Connections, it was very difficult for me to find any. Probably I wasn't literate enough to follow the existing connections, but there I can imagine that he was really pushing for hiding what he was using to connect material with. And that was quite modern in that sense. I mean, it was trying to break from the past.
It might be
But
a response.
in this music,
It might be a response to a debate, like the painting of Courbet.
could
Yeah,
very well be.
the painting of Courbet, where he brought a debate into a painting at that time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that if I belonged to this extreme, that I somehow wanted to disconnect, I would necessarily, I would have to ask myself this question. Okay, I want to disconnect from that. What is it that I want to replace it with? What are the basics of what I want to communicate with? I mean, the extreme would be that famous piece of, what is it, 4 minutes, 33 seconds of silence? Something like that. There is the piano player comes and sits at the piano, and then for 4 minutes, 33 seconds, he doesn't play anything and then leaves the stage. This I understand as an installation of or in an exhibition when you want to make a point. But that is not something you would call music in the sense that we know music, because we want silence and sound, right? So the moment you start seeing it in this frame, then you are using sound. Then it means you are using either tones or noise. Then you are using relations between noise and tones. Then there come intervals, blah, blah, blah. So you have to draw a line somewhere. At some point, you are connecting with something. So this extreme of disconnecting, for me, is a bit of a circus play. Sorry for those friends who are seeing themselves in that end, but I find it like more like a circus show, because they are not dealing with the material in a deeply honest way. They just want to replace things coming from their heritage with something else. But well, good luck with them. I see what they do a bit groundless. I have to tell this. I hope people forgive me, those who are fans of such musicians. One of our very famous tar players, I won't name any names, we were together in a jury at the university. And when the session of the jury was over, he has written his own radif, by the way. He knows all this stuff, he knows all the Dastgah. But when he wanted to show me something, a student had brought a setar for him to check, and he took the setar, and then he wanted to I don't know, boast about his abilities or whatever. And then he told me that I was somewhere abroad and with what orchestra we were performing. And you know what I did? I combined this. He played a phrase from, I don't remember what symphony, and then switched it like with a couple of rhythmic figures that are common in Reng. He switched it to that type of music and brought in a mujannab, a typical interval in Dastgah music. And then he was proud of that. Okay, this is a circus show, I understand. But I don't take it as the main content of what can be productive in music, at least not for me. I personally see creativity as an activity, let's say. As one of the three, what I read in one of Erich Fromm's books about psychology, he refers to something as productive orientation for people to stay sane. If you are not productive, if you don't have that orientation or attitude, you somehow go towards insanity. And one of these, one of the things it brings, that the orientation brings, is to produce thoughts or objects or art. And I see creativity in that kind of setting, in a sense that I have a need to bring out something which exists in me, in my imagination or in my emotions, my thoughts. I mean, all the inner side of my world feels like coming out. It wants to be expressed. It's not that different from what I'm trying to do now with speaking about my thoughts. right? I have some thoughts, I want to express them. I want to communicate them with you. I'm trying to make them followable for whoever is hearing this. They might agree, they might disagree, they might say, I was talking nonsense, whatever. But I'm trying to communicate what is up here.
Yeah.
I can do the same with music. Only that with music, I have the ability of communicating other things as well, if I'm successful. And those other things might be, I mean, like in poetry, it's not just the words that you're communicating. You are picturing something. You are also putting some emotional content into it, blah, blah. So that is what I hope I can do, or I'm trying to do. And for that, I don't want to be a museum curator. I don't want to be the guardian of the tradition. And I don't want to disconnect at all. Why would I want to lose all the big heritage I can have? I mean, it's a big treasure.
Yeah.
I can make use of that. That could become my big support. If I manage to use the proper parts, the appropriate parts, in bringing what is not out there, it exists in me, either as a thought or as a world of emotions, whatever, to bring that, what we call as Adam be wujud, from non-existence to existence. So that is what I would like, or what I aim as my activity. And for that, of course, it takes quite a while that there is something in you cooking, something is taking shape. You are not sure about it. It's a bit vague, but you have received some cues. You have felt something, you have seen something. It's the same with science, right? When you want to come up with a theory in science, you have an understanding, but it takes time to all the pieces kind of fix and fall into place, blah, blah. And then finally, you feel that, but still putting it out in a piece of writing or a formula or whatever takes time, right? You have to work on it. There is the stage of, let's say, discovery. You discover something, you discover a thought, you discover a structure, you discover a nice movement on the instrument. I mean, the easiest, the simplest thing that you suddenly see, oh, on the instrument, I have this sound I hadn't discovered before. But it's a tiny little thing in the ocean of discoveries, right? And then there comes a need to express, for example, what we were talking about, this mirror the voice piece of mine. There comes this imaginary world of dialogues between different sides of this person. And then I can put all these things, these elements together to create something which I hope would communicate what I had inside of me with the audience. You can never, if you do such a thing, you can never ever be sure that what you felt is there. That's why a feedback from the audience is vital, is of essence. Sometimes people think that, oh, you want us to clap for you. We show you appreciation. That's not the thing. The thing is that when I created something out there, which is usually not 100% loyal to what I wanted, but somehow I managed to give birth to something. And of course, I wanted to have signals of how other people perceived it. And that is where feedback and reviews and things should come in, which have become rare and even less and less. I mean, it's almost seldom now that we hear anything as a comment, as a honest comment. Some people say, wow, nice, blah, blah, but you rarely see any review which reflects, and I mean, you can understand if you really managed to create what you had in mind. Sorry, I got too long there.
No, actually, you covered very interesting things. This reminds me of a very important point, which is maybe lessons learned from history. Right? You started
Absolutely.
saying that this Dastgah might be a 200 years old system, which is pretty new, right? What we used to have previous to that maybe was something else, and then a decision made this come to existence. Maybe a decision, maybe nature, evolution. there are things that were a sort of experimentation, which is not forbidden. I mean, people can experiment and try, but not to be cheap, right? Schoenberg example of the 12 tone system and his
Yeah.
students and their composition and whatever. This is an example. Atonal music, things that people try to do, like Sultan Kodai and others going to the distant areas to try to see ideas. They are out of ideas in the official system. And anything in the world, you know, there are things that was there like an experimentation, and all of a sudden it became a very popular form by the music lovers and music specialists, not at the pop culture level. And things move. I mean, these experimentations that come from experience and background can take us further with the new things, the new evolutions. Things are changing. Who was thinking about having a piece that cannot be presented in reality, but in a video like the one you show us? Maybe we need a hologram and some systems to produce the same video. This is something made for this kind of medium. You cannot do it in a live stage for the same person, duplicated 3 times with the current technology,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, over simplifying things and believing, or maybe, or all going in the same commercial way of shining up and showing interest to the business to maybe bring more viewers and more whatever likes or whatever entertainment. This is not music to me, at least. I don't believe this is music. I want to see something that, as you said, connects me and ask me to listen again, to reflect again, to have a personal connection to it. It has a personal meaning to me. Maybe it's coming from a faraway composer or player, but it means something to me. That's maybe not even clear to the originator. I don't think with
Yes.
cheap stuff we can feel or get such stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that we should all be aware of that, what this entertainment industry is doing, because the tools and the medium they have, like the social media, short videos that kind of ask for shorter time span attentions and such things, are affecting people in many ways. I'm not saying they are bad. Everything, I mean, every person also likes to be entertained at times. But if you think that everything is for entertainment, then you are losing at least a side of humanity, I think.
Yeah.
And if everybody falls into this trap of, okay, I'm making music for show. A couple of years ago, I was working with an ensemble. It was a project, what they usually call as a fusion of jazz and world music. And in that project, every one of us were supposed to bring in a theme, and anybody who liked that theme would do an arrangement of that theme for the ensemble, and then we would rehearse it and perform it, blah, blah. Anyway, it was a long-going project, just as an experiment. And what I noticed was that although this was not supposed to be pop music, I mean, in Europe, you have jazz music as like one of the prestigious, I mean, not taken as entertainment, right?
Yeah.
But the performances were most of the time not called concerts anymore. They were calling them show. And I actually discussed it with my colleagues, that what happened to concerts? I'm not saying that a show is a bad thing, but I think words do matter in this sense.
Yes.
That if you tell people that they are coming to watch a show, they would expect entertainment. But if you tell people that they are coming to listen to a concert, then they would come to listen. And that would have a lot of consequences. There was this expression that in a conversation came up from Ross Daly. We were discussing different musicians, and then he was referring to someone who, in his opinion, had a balance between musical content and fireworks. And by fireworks, he meant this approach to technique, which is quite superficial, like show off on the instrument. And he was saying that, well, everybody has that stage for some time. People, especially when they are young, they want to show how they can manage the instrument, and so on and so forth. But I really, I mean, I agree with him. I really love this way of looking at it, that are you doing fireworks? And how much of fireworks are you putting into the show? I personally, I don't feel like doing that. But of course, the world is a big place, and all varieties of things do exist. I just wonder that if we go on like this in, let's say, 20 years, 30 years, or maybe even less, things are getting faster and faster these days, how many listeners do we still have for music? I'm not saying that video is bad. I'm saying that are we listening, or are we only trying to look for something which would entertain us?
Yeah. Or maybe how much distraction is there from music?
Oof,
What
that,
is called music?
yeah,
Sometimes the words, the lyrics, the stage, the lightings, whatever is distracting us from the essence of what is called.
that too.
Yeah, even
That too.
like the fireworks itself is a distraction.
Could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
masters are great technique masters, and we barely notice their technique if we are not paying attention to it, because their music is much bigger. Later, when we want to
Absolutely.
learn to do what they do, we can maybe put the glasses of observation and learn and observe and see the technique, the very high technique they have built for carrying over this emotion and message of music, isn't it, Dr. Nagar?
Yeah, I can't agree more. I personally have come to this point that I um, even emphasize on a definition of technique whenever we are discussing it with, especially with students, that for me, technique is the ability overusing what you can have to express music. Not that you can play fast necessarily, or doing shows. I mean, showing like acrobacy. That's what I mean. If you have high technique, you should be able to express what the music demands comfortably. And the wider range of tools you have to express different types of music, then the higher your technique. But if you just play a couple of passages very fast, it's not technique, in my opinion. Okay, you can go fast, you can run fast, let's say. If you run very fast, are you a good football player? Even in sports, which is more mechanical, supposedly, than music, more physical, that doesn't work. If you just run fast, you won't become a good football player even.
Interesting. Yeah, so Dr. Nagar, what are you working on from a composition perspective? What new pieces are you?
What do you mean by working on?
Yeah, like what are
Recently?
recently, what are the recent works you have presented, or what are your current compositions?
Well, the very, very recent one, let's wait a bit. I performed at a concert I had just last Friday in Cologne. I was working around the idea of someone lost, but not in any place, rather in time.
Uh-huh.
And for that, I was borrowing themes from two, one of them very old song, one of them more recent, but I was putting them in a different context. But let's see if it works out. I still haven't made any recordings of that available. But in December, we did a concert in Rome with two colleagues of mine, but the part I'm going to mention now, which is another recent work of mine, was only with oud and tombak. I was also singing at parts. And that was a kind of a vague dream I had for quite some time, but I hadn't found the right time and occasion to try to give birth to it. You know, many oud players might have experienced it. Oud and tombak together is a tricky combination. They have many similar ranges in frequency. I mean, it's very easy for a tombak to mask the oud, especially if they are not sensitive enough to sound and they don't listen to the oud player, and of course depending on the sound structure of the composition or the improvisation. So if you listen to what is usually played on tombak and oud together, in my opinion, you don't find the defined roles for these two sounds at their best. So that was part of what I was looking for. I wanted to explore around the better possibilities of combining these two instruments. But at the same time, I love the things a tombak can do. I mean, the tombak is physically, if you look at it, it's a very simple instrument. But what a tombak player can do is really vast. Especially after Hossein Tehrani, who they call the father of modern tombak in Persian music. What he brought to the instrument, and then the next generations developed further on that, is just immense. And I loved that. I'm amazed by that part of the heritage. And I always wanted to have a dialogue kind of piece between the oud side, which I usually take oud and vocals together, and tombak. And then at some point, about 6 months ago or so, no more than that, it was last summer, by chance I came up to a piece of poetry by Ahmad Shamdou, another very famous and rather popular Persian poet, a contemporary one, which I love. It's a very strong piece of poetry. It's picturing the poet sitting at the seaside with what he sees outside, but interprets as another scene. I mean, the way he's hearing the sounds and then imagining things on top of that. Of course, it was written in a special social context, which might be not that far from what we have now. Anyway, he has a lot of hidden anger that he sees expressed on the scene of the ocean or the sea. Well, here it's a sea, it's not an ocean. And the rhythm of the poetry is more or less almost through all the lines. It keeps the same afa'il. It's like خاموش باش مرغک دریایی دم دم برام درم بابا بام 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 مفعول و فاعلات و مفاعیلون. Most of the lines are like that. There are two parts which he breaks it shorter, but the whole piece of poetry is more or less repeating that. But he is picturing a lot of different stages of emotion. Like there is a peaceful part, and then there's different sounds come from the sea itself, from the birds, the seagulls, and then he starts imagining different things happening, and he sees the corpse of the dead coming out of the sea, if the dead are coming partly alive, dancing, but a dance out of anger and sorrow, and maybe even torture. So it's a very, very intense scene. And in between, he keeps asking the seagull to go silent, because he thinks if he goes silent, things will take place better, that they will come alive. And that piece of poetry is so beautiful and very strong. I don't have any translation of that to English yet. I've asked a very good friend of mine to to do it, but still I don't have it. So I wanted to put it into. I felt the need of putting into some music. So what we did in that duet with Tombak is that Tombak is partly using the sounds he has available for setting the scene. Well, generally they call it sound effects, but that is a play down, I think, of what can happen. He's using different sounds of what he can produce on tombak. We discussed it. I mean, I presented the tombak player the concept. I gave him the piece of poetry. Then we discussed different sections. And then I asked him what I was imagining. He tried them on the tombak in his own way. He also personalized it himself. And then he worked on it the next time we met online, exactly like this on Zoom. He shared with me what he had found, and then we tried it on the piece. So little by little, in a kind of workshop manner, it took shape. We used some lines of the poetry in my singing, but not all of them. There are parts which I'm playing something on the oud, which is supposed to be a reflection of that line of poetry, but not with words. I'm not using the syllables.
Yeah.
And from the Dastgah content, I'm letting myself totally open to travel between the nuclear of different Dastgahs. I'm sticking to the words. Let's use that vocabulary. I'm sticking to the small parts we have in different maqams, but I'm not traveling through one cycle of a specific Dastgah. In the starting of I mean, the opening of the poetry is Khabid aftab u jahan khabid. That the sun has gone to sleep and the whole world is going to sleep. That is how it starts. And I wanted to express it with a bit of with a sound set that is showing a smooth change. It's not a big sudden change, but it's kind of picturing something very soft and quiet. But then somebody announces that something is happening, and that is the poet sitting there and seeing the scene. So it's again another type of theatrical piece, you can say, but not with these figures, rather with sounds.
Interesting.
And the oud is also partly, and in some very small parts, where the tombak has the role of visualizing or making the image of these dead corpses coming out to dance. The oud is playing the role of this image making, like a little movements on the instrument, which some people might perceive as fireworks, but that was not my intention. My intention was to use the sounds of the oud in making that image, like the dead are dancing and shouting, or this sound we have as in Farsi they call it kel keshidan, like in weddings where they say like that kind of sound that women make.
Yeah.
I tried to combine such possibilities of sound making in order to tell the story of that scene. Again, if it's successful or not depends on how the audience perceive it.
Yeah. Interesting. Dr. Negar, we are learning a lot from you, actually. Thanks for sharing even this experience.
My pleasure.
I have seen, I mean, the amount of effort you are doing, exploring, it's a kind of research. Digging into poetry, digging into images, meanings, utilizing all the tool set you got through the system, through whatever Dawood and your own built tool set to bring up these new experiences, like producible experiences. Yeah, so now like different and variant compositions we have seen through the previous interviews, and I have seen your work here and there. There is a big intention to bring something new. I see that
Big intention to bring something new.
something new, but out of the connection to the heritage and literature, not being shameful of utilizing this treasure, disconnecting, at the same time, you have a personalized thing to bring up. So
I hope so. I hope so.
this kind of composition is maybe not seen for another composer. They are not similar. We can't maybe find the similar experience for another individual, even if they have the same intentions.
Of course not. It's not supposed to be. I think, in my personal view, if I may have a say there, in my maybe not that humble opinion, but no, seriously. What I think, I mean, a lot of people talk about the modern world or the modern person, the modern man, in comparison to what was before, and compare the traditional world of making arts and crafts with the modern way. There has been a lot of talk about that. And again, I have my own understanding in my work. I see it as a very good example I can bring in of two masters. I love their work both. They are highly creative. I see them as like pioneers of whatever they did, not just for their own work, but for many things. Yeah. One is Mohammad Reza Shajarian in Avaz and Persian music, and the other is Hossein Alizadeh in composing, tar playing, setar playing. I think what Shajarian did was closer to what we had in the world of traditional art. Let's say, for example, in miniature painting. There are great miniature painters that we know about in the history of illustrations and paintings. And those who are experts in that field, they can see the difference and immediately say that this is the work of who and that is the work of who. To me, as a not that knowledgeable, that I might be able to see a bit of difference, but I can't really, because I don't know the details, I can't really recognize which is which. But what they did, in my opinion, similar to what Shajarian did, was to use all the possibilities of the tradition to their extent. Like if you have a tree, let all the branches grow.
Yeah.
But it was as if Shajarian was taking this further and further, exploring all the possibilities and taking them further. In poetry, for example, we have a poet, her name was Simin Behbahani. She died a couple of years ago. She was very well recognized, and she was using the old system. She never switched to contemporary, so-called contemporary poetry after Nima Yushij. She was using the system of aruz, as it were, which you have the same rhythmic pattern, the same meter repeated in all lines. Yeah. But she was taking it further. She was making her own afa'il sets according to what she wanted to convey. So I think that is one way of doing it, like trying to use what there is to the maximum possibility. Let everything grow to the highest extent. Yeah. But what Alizadeh did, in my opinion, was a bit different in the sense that he employed all that was there to reflect what he could imagine. So Alizadeh's approach was more modern in the sense that he was employing what there was. He wasn't taking, in this comparison, this is very personal again, but in this comparison, I see Shajarian as a part in the river of tradition. Like that the river of tradition is going and he is taking it to the fullest. Like he lets the water run as powerfully as it can. He explores all the paths that could be. But what you could call it is that it didn't change track of the tradition. It took it to the fullest. But what Alizadeh is doing, or maybe I should also see myself in that line, is that it's the center is the person and the reflections of the world in the mind and heart of that person. But the tools of expression are coming from the tradition.
Interesting.
So it's a bit more individualistic.
Yeah.
It doesn't give any more or less credit to any of these. I think it's just a different approach. If you take your individualistic ideas as the center and use what the tradition is providing you with to express them, or the other way around, it's just a matter of relative weight. Which one is getting more weight or not? And I find myself in the second category, like it's a bit more individualistic. And if it is true, then it's not copyable.
Yeah.
If it is.
Interesting. Dr. Negar, we will listen to the seagull piece, which is the decent.
Which is as long as I talk today.
We are really enjoying the talk regardless of the time. And that's why we have many interviews already. And more.
I hope the audiences of Alnadi haven't had enough. I mean, I hope they still survive this interview to the end.
Yeah, if they are watching, then they are interested.
If they made it to this point. Good. Thank you very much to you, audience.
Thank you, Dr. Negar. And this was really a very rich discussion. I really enjoyed.
And I hope it shed some light on some ideas. Thanks.
Yeah, it did. And maybe we conclude from your end and then we end with your piece.
Okay. I don't know if there is anything I left less confusing than usual, because it's part of my expertise, according to many people. But I personally, I'm very dependent on what you can put under the title of inspiration. I mean, for me, life is a lot better or a lot more meaningful when there is some inspiration. And that means there are other people that could connect with you and you can connect with them. It's not arbitrary. It's not through some regulations or laws. It's something that bling in somebody's head or heart, and then it also gave some light in mine. And I believe in that because I feel alive with that. And I hope that my stuff could also work in that direction. I believe that creativity should. So a good measure to see if a work is creative enough or not, I think is there. If we look at music making from only the craftsmanship, let's call it, only from the way something is constructed, then there is no inspiration, I think. And for me, that would be the measure to divide. If this is a construction, this is there is no inspiration. Everything is done well. Everything is correct, let's say. What is happening at universities is that for students, they have a plan. They should compose a pish daramad, they should compose a char mizrab. They know the rules, they do it, it's correct. But it doesn't express anything. There's a lack of inspiration. So what I hope I'm doing is to be inspired and then to pass it on to the others.
Yeah. Dr. Negar, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and thanks the audience if they survived this one too.
We'll see you soon again.
Hopefully. As I said, the program for tonight is in very close contact with the language, with the Persian language. The next part that we are going to perform, and by we I mean me and my dear colleague Pasha Karamian Tombak, is a recent composition of mine with a particular concept, quite uncommon. It's going to be a dialogue between the oud and tombak, but it's based on a whole piece of contemporary poetry by Ahmad Shamdou. Unfortunately, we didn't have any translation of that available, so we have to ask maybe someone in the audience here could do it sometime later. But in order to give you a picture, it's more or less like a dramatic scene of a poet sitting in the shore, listening to the sounds of the sea. And, of course, the seagull. The name of the poem is The Seagull. And a lot of different pictures come to his mind. He keeps asking the seagull to go silent because he hopes that in that silence something better happens. But we are not going to through all the lines of poetry word for word. We are trying to picture most of it on the two instruments. I would like to invite my colleague and friend, Pasha Karami, to join us. خاموش باش مرده که دریای بگذار در سکوت بماند بگذار در سکوت بمیرد بگذار در سکوت بمیرد دریایی خاموش باش مرغک دریایی خاموش خاموش باش مرغک دریایی بگذار در سکوت بجنبد